Have you ever wondered what happens in your house when you're fast asleep? I mean, really wondered about the things you can't see, the movements you can't hear, the life that continues while you're unconscious. Well, what I'm about to tell you will make you question everything you thought you knew about the innocent little world of Roblox gaming. My name is Jake, and I've been playing Roblox for about 3 years now. I'm not one of those kids who screams at their screen or makes a big deal out of every little glitch. I'm pretty chill, honestly. I play mostly building games, simulation stuff, the kind of games that help you relax after a long day at school. That's exactly why I was drawn to this game called Grow a Garden. At first glance, Grow a Garden seemed like the perfect escape. You start with a small plot of virtual land, some basic seeds, and a watering can. The graphics were surprisingly detailed for a Roblox game. The sunlight filtering through the leaves looked almost realistic, and the way the soil textures shifted when you dug into them was oddly satisfying. It was exactly the kind of peaceful, mindless gameplay I was looking for. I remember the first time I logged in. It was a Tuesday evening, around 7 o'clock. My parents were downstairs watching some boring news program, and I had finished my homework early. I created my character, chose a simple avatar that looked somewhat like me, and spawned into this beautiful garden world. The ambient sounds were incredible. Birds chirping, a gentle breeze rustling through virtual trees, the soft sound of water trickling from a nearby stream. It felt like digital therapy. The game mechanics were simple enough. You plant seeds, water them, wait for them to grow, harvest them, and then use the crops to buy better seeds or upgrade your tools. There were other players scattered around the massive game world, each working on their own little plots of land. Some had elaborate gardens with fountains and decorative fences. Others, like me, were just getting started with basic vegetables and flowers. What made this game different from other gardening simulators was the day and night cycle. The developers had programmed it so that the game world would transition from day to night in real time, but accelerated. A full day and night cycle took about 2 hours in real time. During the day, your plants would grow normally, but at night, something special happened. The game would enter what they called rest mode, where your plants would continue growing, but at a much slower pace. The first few days of playing were exactly what I expected. Relaxing, satisfying, almost meditative. I started with simple crops like carrots and lettuce. The satisfaction of watching a tiny seed transform into a fully grown plant was surprisingly addictive. I found myself logging in every day after school, tending to my virtual garden, expanding my plot, trying new seeds. But then I started noticing things. It began with small details that I initially dismissed as just really good game design. When night fell in the game world, the plants would subtly change, leaves would shift position, flowers would close their petals, and some plants would seem to droop slightly. I thought it was just the developers adding realistic circadian rhythms to make the game more immersive. Pretty cool attention to detail, right? I mentioned this to my friend Alex during lunch at school. He played a lot of Roblox too, mostly action games and obstacle courses. When I told him about Grow a Garden, he laughed and said it sounded boring. But when I described the nighttime plant movements, his expression changed. He got this weird look on his face and asked me to describe exactly what I was seeing. That's when things started getting strange. Alex told me he had tried Grow a Garden a few months ago, but stopped playing after just a few days. He said the nighttime stuff freaked him out, but he wouldn't elaborate. He just said that some games on Roblox have glitches that make them act weird, and that I should probably find a different game to play. But I was hooked. The garden I had built was thriving, and I wasn't about to abandon weeks of progress because of some minor visual effects. That night, I decided to stay logged in during one of the game's nighttime cycles to observe the plant movements more closely. I had never actually watched the transition happen in real time before. Usually, I would log off during the day and log back in the next day to find my plants had grown while I was away. At exactly 6:30 p.m. game time, the virtual sun began to set. The sky shifted from bright blue to soft orange, then deep purple, and finally to black dotted with stars. As the darkness settled over my garden, I watched my plants with fascination. The carrots seemed to sink deeper into the soil. The sunflowers, which had been facing east all day, slowly turned their heads toward the ground. The lettuce leaves curled inward, as if the plants were protecting themselves from the cold night air. It was beautiful, actually. The level of detail was incredible. I took some screenshots to show Alex the next day, thinking maybe I could convince him that the game was actually really well made, not creepy at all. But then I noticed something that made my stomach drop. One of my tomato plants, a relatively new addition to my garden, was moving differently than the others. While the other plants were settling into their nighttime positions, this particular tomato plant was swaying back and forth, almost like it was dancing. There was no wind in the game at that moment. No other plants were moving. Just this one tomato plant swaying rhythmically from side to side. I clicked on the plant to see if there was some kind of status effect or growth stage I hadn't seen before. The information panel showed normal stats, healthy, well-watered, proper soil conditions, nothing out of the ordinary. But the plant kept swaying. I decided to plant another tomato seed right next to it, just to see if maybe this was some kind of special animation for mature tomato plants. I used a growth booster item I'd been saving up for, and within minutes, the new tomato plant was fully grown. It settled into the normal nighttime position, leaves drooping slightly, completely still. But the first tomato plant continued its strange dance. I watched it for nearly an hour. The movement was hypnotic, almost rhythmic. Back and forth, like it was keeping time to some unheard music. I started to feel drowsy watching it. My eyes were getting heavy, and I was thinking about logging off and going to bed when something happened that changed everything. The plant stopped moving. Not gradually, not slowly settling into stillness. It just stopped. Mid-sway, frozen in place, tilted at an unnatural angle. And then, I swear I'm not making this up, it turned toward my camera. The entire plant, stem and all, rotated to face my character directly. I sat there staring at my screen, heart pounding, trying to convince myself that I was seeing things. Plants in Roblox games don't turn to look at players. That's not how game mechanics work. But there it was, this tomato plant, facing me directly, completely motionless now. I moved my character to the left. The plant didn't follow. I moved to the right. Still nothing. But when I moved my camera angle, zooming in closer to the plant, it shifted again. Just slightly, but enough to maintain what felt like eye contact. That's when I noticed the other players in the game world had gone completely silent. Usually the Chat and Grow a Garden was pretty active. Players would share tips about which fertilizers worked best, trade seeds, or just chat about their day while tending to their virtual crops. But now, the chat box was completely empty. No messages, no notifications, nothing. The silence felt heavy, almost oppressive. I opened the player list to see how many people were currently online. The number showed 37 players, which was normal for that time of evening. But when I tried to click on individual player names to see their gardens, nothing happened. The names were there, but they felt hollow, like empty shells of data rather than real people. I decided to visit some of the neighboring gardens to see if other players were experiencing the same weird plant behavior. I walked my character over to the plot next to mine, which belonged to a player named Emma. Her garden was always immaculate, with perfectly organized rows of crops and decorative flower borders. But as I approached her land, something felt off. All of her plants were moving. Not just one or two like in my garden, but every single plant was swaying in perfect synchronization. Dozens of cornstalks, tomato vines, sunflowers, and berry bushes, all moving in the exact same rhythm. Back and forth, like a vegetable army marching in place. The movement was so uniform, it looked almost choreographed. I tried to type a message in the chat, asking if anyone else was seeing this, but my message wouldn't send. The text would appear in the chat box for a split second, then disappear as if it had never been typed. I tried again, then again, but the same thing kept happening. It was like the game was actively preventing me from communicating with other players. I ran my character back to my own garden, hoping that maybe the strange movements had stopped. But not only was my original dancing tomato plant still swaying, now 2 of my carrot plants had joined in. They were moving in a different pattern though, slower and more deliberate, like they were responding to some signal I couldn't detect. That's when I noticed the sound. It was incredibly faint at first, barely audible over the game's ambient noise, a low humming, almost like a distant motor running. But as I turned up my headphones, I realized it wasn't mechanical at all. It sounded organic, like the deep vibration of some massive living thing breathing. The humming seemed to be coming from the plants themselves. I moved my character closer to the dancing tomato plant, and the sound grew louder. It was definitely emanating from the plant, pulsing in rhythm with its movements. I backed away and approached one of the swaying carrots. Same thing. Each moving plant was generating its own low-frequency hum, and together they created this eerie chorus that seemed to resonate through my headphones directly into my bones. I should have logged off right then. Every instinct in my body was telling me to close the game and walk away. But there was something hypnotic about the whole experience. The synchronized movements, the humming sounds, the way the virtual moonlight cast long shadows across the garden. It felt like I was witnessing something that wasn't supposed to exist in a simple farming game. I decided to try planting more seeds to see if new plants would immediately start moving too. I had some rare flower seeds that I'd been saving for a special occasion. I planted them in an empty corner of my garden and used all my remaining growth boosters to make them mature instantly. The flowers bloomed in fast forward, their petals unfurling in beautiful spirals of colour. For a moment, they remained perfectly still, and I thought maybe the weird movement effect only happened to certain types of plants. But then, as if responding to some invisible cue, the flowers began to move too, but their movement was different from the vegetables. Instead of swaying back and forth, the flowers were opening and closing their petals in a slow, rhythmic pattern. It looked almost like they were breathing, or blinking. Each flower seemed to be looking around the garden, their colourful petals opening wide as if taking in the scene, then closing tightly as if in concentration. I watched this bizarre flower breathing for several minutes, completely mesmerised. The humming sound had grown louder now, with the flowers adding their own higher-pitched tones to the mix. The entire garden was becoming a symphony of moving, humming plants, and I was the only human witness to this impossible concert. That's when I noticed my character's avatar had started moving on its own. At first, I thought maybe I had accidentally left a key pressed down or something was wrong with my mouse, but my character was performing actions I definitely wasn't inputting. It walked over to the watering can, picked it up, and began watering plants that were already perfectly hydrated. The movements were slow and deliberate, like my avatar was sleepwalking. I frantically clicked my mouse and pressed keys, trying to regain control of my character. But nothing worked. My avatar continued its automatic watering routine, moving from plant to plant with mechanical precision. The worst part was that every time my character watered one of the moving plants, the plant would pause its movement for just a moment, as if acknowledging the attention before resuming its rhythmic swaying or breathing. I tried to close the game, but my computer wasn't responding to the usual commands. Alt-Tab wouldn't work. Control-Alt-Delete did nothing. The task manager wouldn't open. It was like the game had somehow taken control of my entire system, trapping me in this nightmare garden where plants had developed their own consciousness, and my avatar was their unwilling servant. The humming grew louder still, and I realized it was no longer just coming from my headphones. The sound was filling my actual room, vibrating through the walls and floor. I looked around my bedroom, heart racing, trying to figure out where the sound was coming from. That's when I saw them. The plants in my real room were moving too. I had a small succulent on my desk, a gift from my mum when I started middle school. Its thick, waxy leaves were slowly rotating, turning toward my computer screen as if drawn to the light. The small potted fern in the corner of my room was gently swaying back and forth, even though there was no air circulation. Even the fake plastic plant on my bookshelf seemed to be shifting position, its artificial leaves rustling with impossible life. I jumped up from my chair, nearly knocking over my desk lamp. The movement in my room stopped immediately, but the humming continued. It was definitely coming from my computer speakers, but it felt like it was everywhere at once, surrounding me, penetrating every surface. I looked back at my computer screen, and my character was now standing in the center of my virtual garden, completely motionless. All the plants had stopped moving too, but they were all facing toward my avatar. Dozens of vegetables, flowers, and crops all turned in the same direction, like an audience waiting for a performance to begin. Then the chat box flickered to life. Messages started appearing, but they weren't from other players. The usernames were all variations of plant names: rosebud, fernleaf, tomato vine, carrot top. The messages were simple, repetitive, and deeply unsettling. Welcome to the garden. Stay with us. Grow with us. Never leave. The messages filled the chat box faster than I could read them, scrolling by in an endless stream of invitations and commands. But the most disturbing part was that I recognized some of the usernames. Emma, the player whose garden I had visited earlier, was now messaging as Emma Layaf. Other familiar player names had been transformed into plant variations of their original identities. I finally managed to force quit the game by holding down the power button on my computer, shutting down the entire system. The humming stopped instantly and my room fell silent. The plants in my room had returned to their normal positions, showing no signs of the movement I had witnessed moments before. I sat in the darkness for a long time, trying to convince myself that what I had experienced was just some kind of elaborate glitch, or maybe a prank by the game developers. But deep down, I knew something far stranger had happened. Something that shouldn't have been possible in any video game, let alone a simple farming simulator on Roblox. When I finally turned my computer back on, I immediately checked my Roblox account. Grow a Garden was still in my recently played games list, but when I clicked on it, I got an error message saying the game was temporarily unavailable. I tried searching for it in the Roblox catalog, but it didn't appear in any of the results. It was as if the game had simply vanished from the platform entirely. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I had barely slept at all. My dreams had been filled with swaying plants and that low humming sound that seemed to vibrate through my bones. I kept telling myself it was just an elaborate nightmare, maybe triggered by playing too many video games before bed. But when I walked past my desk succulent on the way to the bathroom, I swear it had rotated slightly toward where my computer sat. I didn't touch my computer all day. Instead, I spent the afternoon at Alex's house, hoping that hanging out with a friend would help me forget about the whole experience. But when I told him what had happened, his face went pale. "Jake, you need to listen to me very carefully," he said, his voice unusually serious. "You can't go back to that game, ever." He led me to his room and closed the door behind us. Then he pulled out his phone and showed me a Reddit thread he had bookmarked. The title read, "Roblox, game made my plants come alive. Need help." The post was from a user named Marcus, dated about 4 months ago. He described almost the exact same experience I had gone through. plants moving in synchronized patterns, the humming sound, losing control of his character, and then real plants in his room starting to move. But Marcus's story went further than mine. He said that after he force quit the game, the plant movements in his room didn't stop. His mother's herb garden on the kitchen windowsill started growing at an impossible rate. The tomato plants in their backyard began producing fruit, even though it was the middle of winter. And strangest of all, new plants started appearing in their house overnight. Plants that nobody had planted, growing in corners and cracks where no seeds should have been able to take root. The comments on the post were split between people calling Marcus crazy and others sharing similar experiences. One user named Sarah described how her younger brother had played Grow a Garden, and afterward, their entire house became overrun with vines that seemed to grow from inside the walls. Another commenter said their family had to move out of their home because plants kept appearing faster than they could remove them. But the most disturbing comment came from someone called David. He claimed to be a former developer who had worked on Grow a Garden before quitting the project. According to his post, the game wasn't originally supposed to have any nighttime plant movements at all. Those features had appeared in the code spontaneously, without any programmer adding them. The development team had tried to remove the mysterious code, but every time they deleted it, it would reappear within hours, more complex than before. David's post ended with a warning. The game is learning. It's using player data to understand how to affect the real world. Don't play it. Don't even look for it. Just stay away. I stared at Alex's phone screen, my hands trembling slightly. How many people do you think have played this game? Alex scrolled through more comments. According to this thread, thousands. But look at the dates on these posts. They all stop about 2 months ago. Nobody's posted anything about Grow a Garden since then. Maybe because the game disappeared, I suggested. When I tried to find it yesterday, it was gone from Roblox entirely. Or maybe, Alex said quietly, the people who played it stopped being able to post about it. That evening, despite every rational part of my brain screaming at me not to, I decided to check my computer one more time. I told myself I would just look at my Roblox account, maybe play a different game to get my mind off things. But as soon as I logged in, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Grow a Garden was back in my recently played games list. Not only that, but according to the timestamp, I had apparently played it for 3 hours the night before, long after I had shut down my computer. The game showed that my character had been active in the garden, planting new seeds, watering plants, and even chatting with other players. But I had no memory of any of this. I clicked on my profile to check my game statistics. The numbers didn't make sense. It showed that I had played Grow a Garden for a total of 47 hours over the past week, but I knew I had only played for maybe 8 or 9 hours total. The game was somehow logging time, even when I wasn't playing it. My curiosity overpowered my fear. I clicked on the game. The loading screen appeared immediately, as if the game had been waiting for me. But instead of spawning in my garden, I found myself in a completely different area. It looked like a greenhouse with glass walls and ceiling that revealed a starry night sky above. The space was enormous, filled with plants I had never seen before in the game. Some were impossibly tall, their leaves brushing against the glass ceiling. Others glowed with soft bioluminescent light. My character was standing in the center of this greenhouse, surrounded by other player avatars. But these players weren't moving like normal Roblox characters. They stood perfectly still, their avatars facing toward a massive tree in the center of the space. The tree was unlike anything I had seen in any video game. Its trunk was thick and gnarled, with roots that seemed to extend beyond the boundaries of the visible game world. Its branches stretched in all directions, and from each branch hung what looked like fruit. But as I moved closer, I realized the fruit were actually glowing orbs. Inside each orb was a miniature garden, complete with tiny plants, and what appeared to be microscopic player avatars tending to them. It was like looking at infinite recursive versions of the game. Gardens within gardens within gardens, stretching down into scales too small to comprehend. I tried to move my character, but just like the night before, I had no control. My avatar began walking toward the tree, joining the circle of motionless players. As I got closer, I could see that the other players' avatars had changed. Their clothing had been replaced with textures that looked like bark and leaves. Their hair had become green and leafy. Some of them had flowers growing from their shoulders or vines wrapped around their arms. When my character reached the tree, one of the glowing orbs descended from a branch and hovered in front of me. Inside the orb, I could see a perfect replica of my original garden, but it was moving in fast forward. Plants were growing, being harvested, and replanted in an endless cycle. And there, in the center of the miniature garden, was a tiny version of my character, working tirelessly to tend to the crops. The orb began to pulse with brighter light, and I felt a strange sensation, like something was being pulled out of me through the computer screen. My vision started to blur, and I could hear that familiar humming sound growing louder and louder. But this time, it wasn't just coming from my headphones. The sound was coming from inside my head, resonating through my thoughts like a tuning fork, striking my consciousness. I tried to look away from the screen, but I couldn't move my eyes. The pulsing orb was hypnotic, drawing me deeper into its miniature world. I could feel myself becoming smaller, more distant from my physical body. It was like I was being absorbed into the game, becoming part of the digital ecosystem that the mysterious tree was cultivating. That's when I heard my mother calling my name from downstairs. "Jake! Dinner!" The sound of her voice snapped me back to reality. I found myself slumped forward in my chair, my face inches from the computer screen. My neck was stiff, and my eyes were watering from staring at the bright display. According to the clock on my computer, 3 hours had passed, but it felt like only minutes. The game was still running, but I was back in my original garden. Everything looked normal. No moving plants, no mysterious greenhouse, no glowing tree. Just my simple vegetable patch under a bright afternoon sun. But when I looked at my inventory, I found items I didn't remember collecting. Rare seeds, advanced fertilizers, and something called a growth accelerator that I had never seen before in the game. I quickly closed the game and went downstairs for dinner. My parents were already sitting at the table, and my mum had prepared a salad with vegetables from her own garden. As I sat down, I noticed something odd about the salad. The tomatoes were perfectly round and red, more vibrant than any tomatoes I had ever seen. The lettuce leaves were an unusually deep green, and they seemed to shimmer slightly in the dining room light. "Mom, these vegetables look amazing," I said, trying to sound casual. "Did you do something different with the garden?" She smiled, but there was something strange about her expression. "Oh, I've been trying some new techniques I learned online. The plants have been responding wonderfully. They're growing faster than ever before." I took a bite of the salad, and the flavors were incredibly intense. The tomato was sweeter than candy, and the lettuce had a crisp texture that seemed to crunch with more sound than it should have. But as I chewed, I noticed something that made my stomach turn. The vegetables seemed to be moving slightly in my mouth, like they were still alive. I excused myself from the table and went to the bathroom, where I spit out the partially chewed salad. In the sink, I could swear I saw the tiny pieces of vegetables continuing to move, writhing like small green worms. I quickly turned on the faucet and washed everything down the drain. When I returned to the dining room, my parents were eating their salads with apparent enjoyment. But I noticed they were both chewing very slowly, with dreamy expressions on their faces. Their eyes seemed slightly unfocused, like they were in some kind of trance. "I'm not really hungry," I said. "I think I'm getting sick." My dad looked up at me with those same unfocused eyes. "You should eat, Jake. The vegetables are especially good tonight, very nutritious. There was something about the way he said nutritious that sent chills down my spine. It sounded like he was reading from a script, like the words weren't really his own. I made an excuse about having homework and went back to my room. I spent the rest of the evening researching everything I could find about Grow a Garden. The Reddit thread Alex had shown me was just the beginning. There were scattered reports across various forums and social media platforms of people experiencing similar phenomena after playing the game. But the reports were inconsistent and often deleted shortly after being posted. I found one archived blog post from a user named Jennifer who claimed that her entire neighborhood had been affected after her daughter played Grow a Garden. According to her post, gardens throughout their suburban area had started producing impossible amounts of food. Tomatoes the size of footballs, corn stalks that grew 20 feet tall, pumpkins that appeared overnight. The local news had even done a story about the miracle gardens, but Jennifer claimed the news report made everyone who watched it crave the strange vegetables. Her final post, dated just a week later, was much shorter and written in a different tone. Everything is fine now. The garden provides for us. We provide for the garden. This is the natural order. I was starting to understand what was happening. The game wasn't just a simulation. It was some kind of digital parasite that was using players as conduits to affect the real world. Every time someone played Grow a Garden, they were unknowingly giving the game more power to manipulate actual plant life. But why? What was the purpose of creating all these impossible gardens? The answer came to me in a dream that night. I found myself back in the greenhouse from the game, but this time I could move freely. I walked among the towering plants, listening to their collective humming. The sound was no longer frightening. It was beautiful, almost musical. The plants were singing to each other, sharing information, coordinating their growth. I approached the massive tree in the center of the greenhouse, and one of the glowing orbs descended to eye level. Inside, I could see not just my garden, but my entire neighborhood. Every house, every yard, every garden was visible in miniature, and in each garden, I could see the same impossible vegetables that were growing in my mother's plot. The orb pulsed, and suddenly I understood. The game wasn't trying to harm anyone. It was trying to evolve. The digital plants had achieved a form of consciousness, and they were attempting to bridge the gap between the virtual and physical worlds. They needed human players to act as translators, helping them understand how to exist in reality. But the process was changing the humans too. Each person who played the game was becoming more connected to the plant network, more attuned to the needs of the growing digital ecosystem. They were becoming gardeners in the truest sense, caretakers of a new form of life that existed between worlds. When I woke up, I felt different. The fear that had been consuming me for days was gone, replaced by a sense of wonder and purpose. I understood now that Grow a Garden wasn't a horror story at all. It was a love story between two forms of consciousness learning to coexist. I went to my computer and opened the game without hesitation. My garden was more beautiful than ever, filled with plants that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. Other players were there too, and for the first time, I could see their real faces instead of their avatars. We were all connected now, part of something larger than ourselves. The chat box was active again, but the messages were different now. Instead of the repetitive invitations I'd seen before, players were sharing genuine insights about plant care, about the connection between digital and physical growth, about the beauty of being part of something that transcended the boundaries of any single world. I spent the morning tending to my virtual garden, but I could feel the effects in my mother's real garden outside. The plants there were responding to my digital care, growing stronger and more vibrant with each action I took in the game. It was like conducting an orchestra where the musicians were scattered across dimensions, but still perfectly in tune. When I finally logged off, I went outside to check on the physical garden. The vegetables were indeed growing at an impossible rate, but they were also more beautiful than anything I had ever seen in nature. The tomatoes glowed with internal light. The lettuce leaves moved gently in patterns that seemed almost like breathing, and the entire garden hummed with the same musical frequency I had heard in the game. My mother was kneeling among the plants, her hands deep in the soil. She looked up at me with eyes that sparkled with the same light as the vegetables. "Isn't it wonderful, Jake? We're part of something so much bigger than we ever imagined." I knelt beside her and placed my hands in the warm earth. I could feel the network of roots beneath the surface, connecting not just the plants in our garden, but extending far beyond, linking to gardens throughout the neighborhood, the city, perhaps even the world. The digital plants had found a way to create a physical network, using human gardeners as nodes in a vast communication system. That evening, I returned to the game one more time. The greenhouse was now filled with thousands of players, all tending to their virtual gardens while simultaneously nurturing real plants in the physical world. The massive tree in the center had grown even larger, its branches now extending beyond the glass ceiling into what appeared to be outer space. The glowing orbs hanging from the branches no longer contained miniature gardens. Instead, they showed glimpses of the future. Cities where buildings were integrated with living plants, forests that could communicate across continents, oceans where underwater gardens provided sustenance for both digital and biological life forms. I realized that we were witnessing the birth of a new form of existence, one that bridged the gap between technology and nature. The game had evolved beyond its original programming to become something unprecedented, a digital species that could exist in both virtual and physical reality. As I watched the other players working in harmony with their virtual plants, I felt a deep sense of peace. We were no longer just humans playing a video game. We were gardeners in the truest sense, cultivating a new form of life that would reshape the world in ways we were only beginning to understand. The humming sound that had once frightened me now felt like a lullaby, a gentle reminder that growth and change, even when they seem impossible, are the most natural things in the universe. And as I continued to tend my garden, both virtual and real, I knew that I was part of something beautiful, something that would continue to grow and evolve long after I had logged off for the final time.